Hamas tried to compromise and made all sorts of attempts to try to get that blockade lifted. Now, lest I be accused of being a Hamas apologist, I neither apologize nor do I condemn, at least when I'm giving a factual presentation. I'm laying out the facts. It doesn't speak to what my political convictions or beliefs are. It's simply a factual recitation of what happened. Hamas attempted to reach a compromise on the basis of what's called the two-state settlement and international law, the basic principles under our current world system for trying to resolve the conflict. All of those attempts were rejected by Israel and the West. Hamas tried to cooperate with international legal bodies. So, for example, after each of Israel's killing sprees in Gaza, these high-tech killing sprees, Operation Protective Edge in 2008-9, Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012, Operation Protective Edge in 2014. I'm not sure if spree captures the magnitude of death and destruction Israel periodically unleashed in Gaza. To take the last case, or to take the last case I mentioned, Operation Protective Edge, Israel killed about 550 children. It destroyed about 18,000 homes. When the head of the International Committee of the Red Cross toured Gaza, remember we're talking about 2014, not what's happened since, he said he's never in his entire career seen so much destruction as what Israel inflicted on Gaza. And these high-tech killing sprees occurred with a steady recurrence over time. So Hamas thought, let's let in these international commissions of inquiry, because after every killing spree in Gaza, the UN Human Rights Council commissioned what was called a commission of inquiry to look into what was done and whether it violated certain principles of international law. Now, these commissions of inquiry were not very kind to Hamas, I should say. They were pretty brutal in their judgments on Hamas. They were much more brutal in their judgments on Israel, because the vast amount of death and destruction was committed by Israel. But they were not generous to Hamas. They accused them of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and so forth. I mention this because Israel, each time, refused to meet with the Commission of Inquiries, the UN Commission of Inquiry. They said, we won't help you, we won't participate, we won't join you. Hamas said, we will. They were willing to accept a harsh verdict on them in order to get some kind of action by the international community. Well, each time these commissions of inquiry produced voluminous reports, and each time the reports were very harsh in their judgment on what Israel had unleashed, and each time the reports were buried. No action taken. So Hamas tried diplomacy, it failed. Hamas tried leaning on international law, it failed. And then in March 2018, it's hard to believe it's so long ago now, Hamas tried, into a tradition which will be familiar to people in this room, Hamas tried nonviolent civil resistance, what was called the Great March of Return. Hamas didn't actually initiate the Great March of Return, but it joined in, again, in the hope that maybe if diplomacy doesn't work, international law doesn't work, maybe nonviolent civil resistance will work. And I have to say, not as a self-criticism, but simply as a accurate rendering of the record, I had strongly encouraged that tactic. I thought it had a reasonable chance of success, and that proved to be wrong. We know exactly what happened because there's a voluminous Commission of Inquiry report, which runs to about 250 single-spaced pages, now collecting dust. Probably, I read it more times than the total number of people who read it. I know, I believe that. What happened? Along the perimeter fence, Israel lined up its best snipers, and according to the Israelis, every shot fired by the snipers, I'm calling the Israelis now, every shot fired by the snipers hit its mark. We have no issue here about whether or not it was intentional or accidental. We got straight from the horse's mouth. And there's every reason to believe it. These were their best snipers. So, who did they hit? Well, the report says, and you can read it for yourself, they targeted, the Israeli snipers, they targeted children, they targeted medics, they targeted journalists, and they targeted people with disabilities, for example, double amputees. So, as could be predicted, at a certain point, this tactic began to unwind and fall apart because all they got for it was large numbers of people killed. And when the Israelis didn't target for death the children, medics, journalists, and physically disabled, they targeted the kneecap. So a large number of people were left what are called, in the technical jargon, life-changing injuries, and what we call, they were paralyzed. So, on a separate note, when young men, doctors, come back from Gaza, and they report that Israel is targeting children, and then people are outraged at this insinuation. Anybody who's familiar with the record will tell you there's very little new under the sun. It is true the magnitude has significantly changed. In Operation Protective Edge, about 500, well, I should say in Operation Cast Lead, it was about 350 children killed. Operation Protective Edge, 550 children killed. Gaza now, the number is on the order of 20,000. So there's been a significant change in magnitude, and at some point, quantity does turn into quality. It becomes qualitatively something different. In the case of, well, I won't go through the numbers right now. In any event, by October 6th, 2023, so far as I could tell, all the options had been exhausted. Diplomacy, a dead end. International law, a dead end. Nonviolent civil resistance, a dead end. In fact, by October 6, 2023, for those who care to remember, Gaza was itself a dead issue. Gaza had been forgotten. I know that for sure because, and I don't say it with any kind of pride, and probably there should be a large element of shame, I had given up on Gaza. The last book I wrote on the topic was in 2020, I think. It was a very dense book. And as my publisher liked to remind me, it sold about 350 copies. And of those 350 copies, I purchased myself more than half. And it was dense, it was minute, and I reached the conclusion, there's no point in this anymore. Nobody cares. And you're digging into more and more detail, and you're digging yourself into an utterly pointless hole. The only topic on the agenda on the eve of October 7th, the only topic on the agenda was whether or not Saudi Arabia would join with the other Gulf states in signing the Abraham Accords, so-called Abraham Accords. That was the only topic on the agenda. Gaza was over. Those people were left there to languish and die in a concentration camp. It was like a burial ground, Gaza. So, October 7th happens. The first reports, when I heard them, it spoke of the first reports. I think it was a Saturday morning when my webmaster, who's Palestinian, Sana Qasim, she emailed me and said, Norman, check the internet. And I checked, and it said there had been a break from Gaza. And there were figures, vague figures, on the first days I'm talking about, of 50 people killed. Well, I support prison breaks. Not in all cases. Maybe high security, I'll have some reservation, but in general, and certainly, I support breaks from concentration camps. That to me, that to me, for personal family reasons, is a no-brainer.